Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 104 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I got Joe Meade with me, and tonight we are going to be going over week 3 in the Big Ten. Wasn't a ton of great games, including Big Ten teams, but we did have a pretty notable headline away from the field. But Joe, let's just go into it. We had two games Friday night. Indiana beats the Sycamore 73-0. Not much to note from here other than running back Lee Beebe Jr. Will be out for the year for Indiana. Roman Hemby is the lead back, but you know, definitely a little bit of a blow there for IU. But the main headline from Friday, Joe, came from the other game. New Mexico 35, UCLA 10. UCLA was 15-point favorites here. We said, they better win, and not only did they lose, they lost by a lot. And obviously, something happened after the game. But so let's talk about this game first. New Mexico, a team that was expected to finish 11th in the Mountain West, goes to the Rose Bowl, wins by 25. Rock bottom for UCLA.
Yeah, I definitely picked New Mexico to cover. I didn't think they would necessarily pull off the upset, let alone completely ransack the UCLA football program. And, we'll talk about the Deshaun Foster thing in a second here. Everyone wants to blame Nico. This is such a deeper issue than him that to just kind of scapegoat him, I get why people were doing it. His decision to go there was not popular. But for New Mexico to have two failed red zone trips in the first half indicates this game could have been a lot worse. This could have been like 45 or 49-10. And, New Mexico's offense had some moderate success against Michigan's defense. So I'm not shocked they scored. Just UCLA's ineptness on offense, especially when you have an offensive minded or had an offensive minded head coach, was probably what was most disappointing. Let's face it, Sean. Of the four teams, UCLA's inclusion into the Big Ten for football has been a complete and total nightmare.
Yeah, it's there were some reports out of training camp that it was just sort of a joke the way that program was being run. But last year they did have 5 wins. Foster was hired really late. They did scrap together a season, and with Nico, people thought, us included, that they'd be able to get into the middle or at least the bottom middle. And it's as worse as anybody could have predicted. They are 0-3, and after the game, either Saturday or Sunday, they did fire Deshaun Foster. The AD did, take some blame for how the tough situation he was put in. But this is an opening, Joe, that is probably going to be one of the bigger ones in the country. Might be the only Big Ten job that opens. And there's already been some names being floated around. Quick. We don't have to talk about this whole episode, but any idea who you think might be interested in this one?
No, I really don't. I think the fact that Chip Kelly left to be a coordinator let alone Ohio State, who won the national title, the fact in your last 24 months you had a coordinator, you're a coach leave to be a coordinator in interconference, and a guy who I thought actually outperformed expectations last year get fired after 3 bad games. And I understand both arguments for firing and for not firing Deshaun Foster. In the coaching community, that's not going to be viewed upon very favorably. And I think there's a lot of other jobs, i.e., a Virginia Tech, even that's probably at a better level, worse conference, better level than a UCLA, that are going to look a lot more viable. And until that athletic department puts the proper infrastructure and proper investment into football, I really can't float a guy that's going to be of major status. Like, even like when Jim Mora went to UConn, like, I think that's probably their ceiling here. I'm going to be real honest with you, Sean.
Yep.
And at least there's a level of competition where you could outperform expectations here. I do not see UCLA being a viable threat in this league for the next 3 to 5 years. And I don't think a coach is going to want to take that on. And especially if that's how the athletic department treated its last 2 head coaches.
I think it's not like a job that anybody at a similar level is going to take. I think it's either a jump seat position. Maybe you can go look at USF, Tulane, although I don't know about Tulane or somebody who's unemployed right now. Do they convince somebody like Ed Orgeron or John Gruden? Probably not.
No.
Um, and it is probably the second worst job in the Big Ten, maybe third worst. But their problems go beyond the football field. They need to play on their own campus. You've been to the Rose Bowl, Joe. It is not very close to the campus of UCLA. It's hard to get
No.
to. Even when they're good, even when Chip Kelly had them ranked in the Pac-12, they still didn't have that place very full. And I know it's a huge stadium and all that, but dark days ahead for UCLA,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And they will likely feature pretty early in our next power rankings because it'll be near the bottom.
Yeah. One last thing, Sean. I don't see a Dan Mullen either. I know that name's been floated around. I think you're out of your mind if you think he's taken that job, especially after beating them, after seeing them in person. I don't think he really wants to pick up the pieces. One potential name I could see is like maybe so like lower coordinator, like Andy Kolnicki, but is he really? He's a Midwest guy. Is he really going to take that job? The Penn State OC interconference. Um, Maybe a Jim Leonard, but he's kind of pretty content where he is. So I don't know. Those are a few Big Ten names I could suspect might come up, but I doubt it would ever progress to even a talking stage.
One person who is in a job that I think is interesting, Joe, and who might actually not hang up the phone immediately is Kalen DeBoer from Alabama. He is still there, and I don't know if they're going to fire him, but it's pretty clear that he's not a great fit there. And, he had Washington in the national championship game 2 years ago. I think if this opened next year, a year later, I think DeBoer, could be either fired or definitely getting fired from Alabama. Maybe his agent could do some back channeling. That one was a little interesting when I saw that one pop up. I just don't know if the timing is right there. But that'll be something to monitor. We have a vacancy, and we're 3 weeks in. The top 25 team doesn't even have a win yet, and we already have a vacancy in our conference. So a lot to come from UCLA in the future, content-wise, as we will see short lists and all that. But unfortunately, not much for the game. Players do have 30 days to enter the transfer portal. So the Nico era might be even shorter than we thought. All right, Joe, let's turn the page to Saturday. We had a little bit of an interesting game here at the Horseshoe in Columbus. Ohio 9, Ohio State 37. The Bobcats did hang around for far longer than anybody gave them credit for, but Ohio State ends up pulling away. Not exactly what the Buckeyes had in mind when they saw Ohio on the schedule.
No, but I am gonna be pretty frank here. I'm not overreacting at all. I think, as I said, Ohio won the MAC last year. They beat West Virginia.
They could
They
win the MAC this year.
Yeah, they could win the MAC this year, and they gave Rutgers a heck of a scare. So, do I think there's reason to be concerned for the Buckeyes? No. I think having a bye week this week will really suit them. That's why we're not afraid to talk about them on this episode. Going to Washington will be a test, but it's not because they looked particularly bad against Ohio. I just think the intensity was not there. I think they're still in search of a number two. Now they have that guy on the roster. I think it's either a Cardell Tate and Innis. I'd like to see Sayin feature the tight ends more. I think, he's looking for number four and not a bad guy to look for. But if Peoples could get going, if Donaldson could get going, I think the offense could really use an upgrade. Do they need an upgrade to win the conference? No, but in terms of running the table and repeating, I think that's something Ohio State fans are going to look for in these next few games. I do think we'll talk a lot more about that Washington game in 2 weeks, so I'll kind of hold my tongue there. But I don't think it's a huge concern, especially Matt Patricia and the defense look as good as advertised, if not better. So I'm not overreacting to that game at all, Sean.
Yeah, when the better team in these types of games finds their footing in the second half and pulls away, I don't think there's much to worry about. Sleepy spot. You have at least one team thinks it's a rivalry. You can get some motivated play early on, and This is probably the Ohio players' biggest game that they'll ever play. And if they're from Ohio, they probably grew up rooting for the Buckeyes. So, the talent got them, and they executed well in the second half and all that. So, plus a week before a bye week, I don't think anything to worry about also. All right, Joe, Penn State 52, Villanova 6. Penn State schedules a FCS team, and while a little bit of a slow start again for the Nittany Lions, they pull away and win big.
Yeah, if I could critique one thing, Drew Aller passing on third down wasn't great. Do I think it's really going to matter in the next week or two? No. They play Oregon the 27th. Again, we're going to have to save it for that preview episode. I think there are things they could work on, but the defense I still think is legit. I do believe that Drew Aller will, in some semblance, get it together. I'll put it to you this way, Sean. I think Penn State's one of the best teams in the country and conference. Nothing has confirmed that to me, but nothing has deterred me from that opinion either. And frankly, the level of opponent here is embarrassing. I'm not criticizing Penn State as a whole. Every team has a year like this. But me learning, in terms of learning, I'm not learning anything about Penn State right now.
All right, let's go out to Chicago, Joe. Big noon kickoff was on the campus of Northwestern as Oregon came into town, and they took care of business. They win 34-14. All of Northwestern's points were scored in the fourth quarter against many of the reserves. A windy day out there in Illinois, so Oregon did sort of focus on the run, maybe a little more than they normally would, but this game should have been a blowout. Now, they didn't cover, but it was, and Dante Moore is showing up on Heisman watch lists, and we'll get there eventually in a few weeks, but Oregon didn't need to stub their toe here, and they didn't.
No, I think probably not their greatest performance, but do I think with the wind and all that, I think probably their strength is just their O-line. Tierra Hill Jr., 5 rushes, 94 yards. Didn't need much from the other backs, and frankly, I don't think Oregon was really up to play this game. Their fans, they had a semblance of support in the stands, but in that kind of high school Lakeshore Stadium, it's kind of a dead environment. To me, it kind of just seemed like a video game simulation, to be completely honest with you. I think Dante looked really good. He looked really accurate. He looks in control of an offense for the first time. We definitely didn't see that his first year at UCLA. I think we're seeing more and more of that now. More and more of that now. And doing that in a conference game is a good indicator. They play another OSU, Oregon State this week. I don't think we're going to learn much from that game. So Oregon, kind of like Penn State, it's just going to be when those two match up, but I'm going to learn a lot.
Yep, it was an 11 a.m. kickoff. You're probably not going to get your best performance there. Now, side note, Big Noon is going to Utah this week, and that's 10 a.m. local time kick. So that'll be more interesting there. And then it was just announced today that it's going to be in Champaign week 5. So back to the Big Ten in week 5. And those Illinois Fighting Illini, Joe, did beat Western Michigan 38-0 here. Eyes focused on week 4 for the Illini.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. That's my reaction to that game.
Yep, a bigger one went down at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa. Luke Fickell and the Badgers headed down to play Kalen DeBoer in Alabama, and it was all Crimson Tide. They end up winning 38-14. Wisconsin hangs a little bit early, but ultimately their offense not doing enough to hang. Alabama still playing with a chip on their shoulder after getting embarrassed by Florida State in week 1. Joe, we didn't expect this one to be close, and unfortunately for Wisconsin, it wasn't.
Yeah, I think Danny O'Neal really struggled. I think he was just under duress most of the game, and frankly, they need to pray to get Billy Edwards Jr. back very soon for this Maryland game. I think they had some positive with Jaden Ballard, some of the Darian Dupree. I think they have some playmakers in the receiving room. I don't think Danny O'Neal is the guy to get them the ball, though. And Alabama just had a field day on offense. I think Simpson had a lot of time to throw. He made some really nice throws, but there were guys also streaking wide open. So I think Wisconsin kind of knows what they are. I think we kind of suspected that they're a team that's going to have a really hard time hanging with the more elite, like let's call it top 20 teams in the country. And unfortunately, they play a lot of really good Big Ten teams. So I think Wisconsin, the goal still is probably get to bowl eligibility again, those bowl practices, and build for 2026. I don't think they're necessarily off schedule. I think this is a little discouraging, but based on Wisconsin's expectations, their over under win total being at that 6.5, I believe that they're kind of in line, especially with Edwards Jr. But that's going to be their main storyline from this game. Can they get Billy Edwards back in time?
All right, let's go down to Ann Arbor, Joe, the Connor Stallions Bowl between Michigan and Central. Now it was 63-3 Wolverines. Not entirely unexpected, but with Biff Poggi as the coach, there was a clear change in style, I think. They let Bryce Underwood run, and the offense looked a lot better. I don't know, and we can compare New Mexico to Central. New Mexico certainly a better team, but that Michigan team looked different than the first two that we saw. I know it's the Chippewas, but Joe, you've got to take at least a few positives away from this one.
Definitely. I think the defense, getting off the offense, because we'll talk about them in a second, they're at 100% pressure rate, I believe. And that's ridiculous. I think TJ Guy was out for this game for whatever reason. I really believe that if Michigan could figure out their pass rush and their third down woes, which is what in large part cost them on the defensive side of the ball against Oklahoma, they could perhaps go into Ohio State 9-2 or 10 and want to make that game really mean something. On the offensive side, they kind of let Bryce Underwood prove why he was one of the top-rated high school recruits in history. One thing I'll caution Michigan against is doing a lot of design runs for him, QB delays. That doesn't really hold up well with Michigan's relatively uh, progressive O-line, like O-line that's going to progress throughout the year. I do think that Underwood, kind of when plays break down, him using his legs is such a cheat code. And if Michigan doesn't utilize that in the future, they will be sorely mistaken and severely sorry. So I think this is a positive. I think you kind of now show teams and you put extra stuff on film, and you're going to make Nebraska and your future opponents commit an extra defender to Underwood. Think he missed a few throws, but that's going to happen throughout the year. But now that he can use his legs, I think it unlocks a lot more options for the young freshman.
Yeah, it should be easier to throw the ball if there's one less defender. If you have to be like accounted for on the defense, and I think Nebraska's watching this and saying, all right, like we're not going to be able to just sit deep and cover the receivers, and because he will take it. I think those QB runs or non-designed QB runs are big. You saw John Mateer do it to Michigan 6 or 7 times where there were clear non-quarterback runs. All right, first guy, second guy, third guy's not open, get the first down. If Bryce Underwood plays like that, I think Michigan can be a top 25 team. And we'll see what happens because they've got a big one up next week against Nebraska. They beat Houston Christian 59-7. Not much to go over there. Maryland beat FCS Towson 44-17. 3-0 for Maryland. That's going to be important. Rutgers also gets to 3-0 with a 60-10 victory over Norfolk. Michigan State a little bit closer than they wanted, Joe. 41-24 over Youngstown after their sort of emotional double overtime victory against Boston College. Definitely a trap game here against Youngstown, and it didn't go great, but they got the win.
Yeah, Michigan State, I think you're going to have to account for their identity here. Think they have a good running back room. I don't think their O-line and run blocking is that great. I don't think it can progress to being something that great. I think Childs is awesome. I think the receiver room is going to be interesting, monitoring that Marsh situation going into Saturday against USC. I think they have to utilize Jack Belling more. I think they did a great job of that at the beginning part of 2024. I think they need to continue to do that for Aiden Childs. He's been really good all year, though, Sean. Running, decision-making is so much better than last year's. And I know they've played two really bad teams and a team that's pretty bad at defense in Boston College. I have to say there's been a lot of growth. Until proven otherwise, Aiden Childs has definitely been one of the more improved quarterbacks throughout the country to me. So I think Michigan State's defense, though, is a clear problem. The fact that they could get beaten through the air, they could get beaten by dual threat quarterbacks. Uh, Aiden Childs is going to continue to have to be almost perfect for them to win a lot of games here.
Yeah, it's the same story. They're continuing to not win by as much as they should because their defense is giving up too many points. Like, you got to 40 against Boston College and you found yourself in overtime. And BC is probably not better than a 6 or 7 win team.
No, they lost to Stanford by double digits, so they might be a 5-win team.
Yeah, and bowl eligibility not certain there, so the defense is going to have to improve. Could Childs win in a shootout against a similar team? Sure, but you've had if you get a 40-point effort from Aiden Childs in the offense, like, you have got to win that game probably by 10 or more. And I could just see like a couple of 50 to 45 losses where you're like, wow, like, our offense scored 5-6 touchdowns and we lost. That's they're gonna have to figure that out. All right, Joe, let's go to West Lafayette. USC 33, Purdue 17. This game had a pretty long weather delay, but it is the first loss of the new era there in West Lafayette. USC has looked good so far this year, and this one wasn't really a game. Offense was solid, defense was solid, and I believe USC has entered the top 25, if I'm not mistaken. The AP, that is.
Yeah, they've entered they're at literally number 25. Was I overly impressed by USC or no? I was more impressed Jada Maeva protected the ball, and USC last year got in trouble by not protecting the ball in some of these more trap games, like particularly the game at Maryland, at Minnesota. 2 games where they probably should have been an 8-4, 9-3 team last year, which is why I've continued to maybe overrate USC, because I think last year their record was not indicative of the kind of team they were. I think Jaden Maeva is a clear upgrade over Miller Moss in the fact that he's just getting guys like Jacoby Lane, like McCree, and evenly distributing the ball. Makai Lemon, too, has been great. Wayman Jordan's impressed me in the running game as well, Sean. I think they have a more balanced attack this year. I think Maeva can be mobile, too. I don't think he had to utilize it as much. He probably utilized it a little too much in this game for Lincoln Riley, the offensive coordinator, and QB coach's liking. What I'll say, though, Sean, is I think they could beat you with more on offense. I'm still a little skeptical on the defense until they play a real team on offense, and I think Michigan State is that. So if Nick Marsh plays and they do a good job limiting that offense and confusing Aiden Childs, who's now a second-year starter, I think I could really start to compliment USC's defense.
All right, let's go through these last 2. Joe, Iowa 47, UMass 7. Didn't know Iowa could put up 47, and 30 of that was in the first half. Obviously, a Division I independent in UMass who did lose to UConn, and they're definitely the bottom of the barrel. But Iowa, well done there. And Minnesota, Cal, after dark here. It's the Cal Bears that get a 27-14 win. They have a very fun quarterback to watch whose name is incredibly hard to pronounce, so I'm not going to try it. But this game was a toss-up according to the spread, Joe, and Minnesota does not come out on the right side of it. Obviously, one that started at 10 a.m. Eastern time, which is both of our times. Joe, disappointing for Minnesota here to lose handily to a team that's not expected to finish near the top of the ACC.
Teams don't do well. You're going to punch me through the screen for saying it. I just don't know why you scheduled this game for Minnesota. Clearly, this was years in advance before you knew of the expansion, but, I mean, just stop. I'm going to tell every athletic director from Ohio State, Michigan, down to a Rutgers, UCLA, or Maryland, UCLA, whatever. Program by program, stop doing it. It just rarely works. And the fact they were without Darius Taylor, I think, was kind of the death sentence here. Drake Lindsey looked just like kind of in space. One TD, one interception, very bad QBR. He looked like a freshman looked, so I'm not going to go after the kid at all. But just kind of a combo of bad ingredients for Minnesota and resulted in a loss. I thought they were pretty competitive through the first three quarters, just got away from them. Not a great loss, though. I don't think Minnesota, as we know, is a playoff team. I just hope this won't cost them bowl eligibility because this easily could have just been a MAC team they could have ran through. And I hope that doesn't cost them a bowl spot.
Yeah, do we know if there's a return game next year? Because these two didn't play last year. Maybe it's a deal with the ACC, because didn't North Carolina go up there last year?
Yep, North Carolina did go up there last year.
Okay, so we'll see in the future. But just disappointing for Minnesota. You would have thought that they maybe could have won this game, and maybe Cal is better than we expect. ACC is not bad this year, not as bad as they have been. But disappointing for Minnesota here to not get the job done. All right, Joe, well, that is our Week 3 recap.